Hello and welcome back to the We're Not Experts History podcast. Now, today we are talking about one of the most unbelievable survival stories in human history, the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition. It's a bit of a mouthful, that. And to guide us through this icy madness, I'm joined by Mr. Nason, James. So, where do we start with this?
Let's start at the beginning. So,
That would
so
be ideal.
yeah. So to try and begin to understand the expedition, you really have to understand the man behind it, and that is Sir Ernest Shackleton.
Yeah.
And he wasn't English. I know. I think when people look at this, they just assume he was English. He was
I
actually born
actually
in
assumed it
County
was
Kildare.
English.
I think most people would do. He was actually born
Yeah.
in County Kildare in Ireland in 1874.
Oh.
No, his family actually had Yorkshire roots. His father wanted to, rather than become an explorer, his old man wanted him to become a doctor.
A doctor? That's quite a
Doctor,
jump. A doctor to a polar explorer.
a little
So
bit.
how did he end up there?
He, I suppose there's a lot of people then couldn't resist that allure of the sea.
Mm.
So by the time he was 16, he'd joined the Merchant Navy and he rose through the ranks really, really quickly. And later on, he joined the Royal Naval Reserve. And
Wow.
that whole early career really gave him the navigation skills and that raw discipline that he would need later on. But this first actual taste of Antarctica came in 1901 with Robert Falcon Scott's Discovery Expedition.
Oh, is that Scott of the Antarctic? I know
That's
that
him, yeah.
name.
Yeah.
So how did Shackleton get on with him?
Not particularly well.
Oh, really?
Shackleton, no, they didn't know. So Shackleton did brilliantly at first, and even set a record for reaching the furthest south latitude at the time. But the conditions were brutal, and he ended up being sent home early due to health concerns. But many historians reckon it was actually a clash of personalities between him and Scott that cut his trip short.
Yeah, I can imagine actually. Two massive egos in a freezing cold
Yeah,
tent. That probably doesn't make for a happy home. But obviously that didn't stop him.
no, no, not a chance. So if anything, it just fueled his fire. So we then come forward to 1907, and he'd raised funds to lead his own voyage, which was called the Nimrod expedition. And this is where we see the real measure of the man. And they got within just 97 nautical miles of the South Pole, which is closer than anyone had ever been. But their supplies were running dangerously low. So Shackleton had to make a choice, and he chose the lives of his men over the personal glory. So he turned them back.
Whoa, that must have took a lot of guts actually to be
Oh,
that
yeah.
close to making history, but having to make that decision to walk away.
Yeah. That selflessness sort of become his trademark.
Mm.
And even though they missed the pole, the expedition was a massive success. And another team on the trip climbed Mount Erebus, which is
Mm.
an active volcano out there.
Mm.
And they located the South Magnetic Pole. And when he got back to Britain, he was a national hero. He was knighted for it.
Oh, okay. So he's Sir Ernest Shackleton now.
Yeah.
He's famous. He's got the glory. So why did he go back?
It was because the ultimate prize was taken. So in 1911, you had this Roald Amundsen, who was a Norwegian. He'd reached the South Pole first. So that race
Right.
was over. But
Okay.
Shackleton needed a bigger, more ambitious goal. And he decided he wouldn't just stand at the pole, he would cross the entire Antarctic continent from one side to the other.
Whoa.
So, yeah, by 1914, he was ready to launch the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition aboard a ship that would soon become famous for all the wrong reasons, really. And it was called the
Mm.
Endurance.
Okay. So the South Pole's been bagged already, and
Yeah,
so Shackleton needs a new plan. But crossing the entire continent of Antarctica, yeah,
yeah.
that 1914, that sounds impossible. So what? How was it? How was he planning to pull this off?
Right. So it was a massive logistical puzzle. The plan involved two completely separate ships. So Shackleton was
Mm.
going to take Endurance into the Weddell Sea side of Antarctica and land a shore party at Vassal Bay. From there, they'd march right across the South Pole to the other side, the Ross Sea.
Okay, but that's thousands of miles of ice. I mean,
Yeah.
how do you carry enough food for a trek that long?
Well, the answer is you can't.
No.
And that's where this second ship came in. So a ship called the Aurora, commanded by a fella named Annius Mackintosh, was sent to the opposite side of the continent into the Ross Sea. And their entire job was to march inland and lay down supply depots along the final leg of Shackleton's route. And if those depots weren't there, Shackleton and his crossing party would just starve.
Whoa. So his life was literally depending on a completely different crew on the other side of the world. And I guess they've got no way they can't text each other, can they, to check out
No,
how it was going. So,
no.
wow.
Yeah, so yeah, these stakes are enormous. They're so high, but this was the kind of grand high risk challenge
Mm.
that that perfectly aligned with Shackleton's spirit. To get the right men for it, he allegedly placed his now legendary. If you look it up, you can see it online. He placed this legendary advertisement in the London newspaper, and it read, "Men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful,
Oh my
honour
God.
and recognition. Yeah, honour and recognition in case of success."
Okay, safe return doubtful. So who
Yeah.
would read that and say, "Yeah, sign me up. That sounds great." What?
Um, not the likes of you and me, but you'd be
No,
surprised. He was inundated with
really? Oh
applications.
my, wow.
Yeah, it says a lot about his charisma and just how fascinated people were with polar expedition back then. So in the end, he carefully selected a crew of 28 men for the Endurance, and he didn't just pick seasoned sailors. He took scientists, carpenters, engineers, a surgeon, and even a professional photographer. And he
Oh,
was looking for specific skills, but above all, he the right temperament to survive under this immense pressure.
wow. So that's the crew. What
Yeah,
about the ship itself? You mentioned the Endurance earlier. Was she built for that kind of punishment?
yeah, yeah. So she was built in Norway, and it was what they called a three-masted barkentine or barkentine. But I don't know. I don't know anything about ships.
No, neither do
Barkentine,
I.
no. But she wasn't the biggest ship afloat, but she was exceptionally strong. So her
Mm,
hull was constructed from thick, solid timbers, specifically designed to withstand the immense pressure of sea ice. And
okay.
Shackleton knew the ice would be an issue there, so he wanted the most robust vessel he could get his hands on.
Okay, so they've got the sturdy ship, they've got their brave or maybe slightly mad crew of 28. So when do they actually set off?
So on the 1st of August 1914, they
Wait,
set sail from Plymouth.
August 1914. So that's when
Yeah,
First World War broke out, roughly.
yeah. Literally, as Europe is been plunged into conflict, the Endurance was heading south towards Buenos Aires to pick up its final supplies, and then it would go on to South Georgia, which was their last staging post. So they were
Okay.
leaving. They were leaving the civilized world, if you like, behind, just as it was tearing itself apart,
And becoming
and they were completely
uncivilized.
unaware. Yeah, they were completely unaware that their own expedition was about to turn from this grand journey to of geographical conquest into what would become a brutal fight for survival.
Okay, so they're heading south just as Europe is kicking off, if you like.
Yeah, oh yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but let's just talk a bit more about this crew of 28. So it wasn't just a bunch of random sailors, like you said before.
No.
Who were the key players that Shackleton took with him?
Okay, so it was a brilliant mix of characters. So right at the top, as his second in command, was a fellow called Frank Wild, and he was an absolute veteran. He'd already been south with both Scott and Shackleton before, and his loyalty and just sheer experience were the backbone for the trip. Then you had the captain was a bloke called Frank Worsley, and he was a New Zealander. He was a brilliant sailor, and it was like almost superhuman navigator. As we'll see later, his skills with just a sextant literally meant the difference between life and death.
Wow. I'm
Yeah.
guessing as well that he would have needed some tough characters on board or on deck.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So that's where you come to the second officer, who was a man called Tom Crean, and he was a giant of an Irishman, and he'd already served on two of Scott's expeditions in the past, and he was famous for his raw endurance and bravery. But it wasn't all like your rugged, roughy tufty sailors. The scientific and creative teams were just as vital, and they had a meteorologist named Leonard Hussey, who critically brought along his banjo.
A banjo in
The
Antarctica.
banjo.
Why?
Well, Shackleton actually insisted on it.
Oh, did
He
he?
knew that. He knew that keeping up morale during months of total darkness would be just as important as having food. Then there was also Frank Hurley, who was the official photographer, and the only reason we can visually picture this expedition today is because of Hurley's amazing photographs and film footage as well. And he went to extreme lengths to capture those images.
Wow. So it sounds like quite a diverse crew, but
Yeah,
I imagine as well, there were quite specific roles, like you said, like carpenters and cooks. I imagine their jobs became a lot harder than they signed up for.
yeah. So the cook was a man called Harry McNish,
Right.
and he was a highly skilled. Did I say cook? No, he wasn't a cook. That was Charles Green. Harry McNish was a carpenter, and he was a very skilled shipwright. He
Mm.
was considered a bit of a prickly character, but his craftsmanship saved their lives later on. Then the
Right.
cook, Charles Green, had an appalling, I don't wouldn't even want to think about it, the task of feeding 28 men under this increasingly desperate conditions. And not only that, there was a stowaway. There was
Oh,
this,
really?
a young fellow named Percy Blackborough, and who sneaked on board. I think it was at Buenos Aires, but eventually he was just accepted as a steward.
That is quite some level of commitment to stow away on a ship going to
Yeah,
Antarctica. So, pulling all this together, so you've got the ship, the provisions, the
yeah,
crew,
yeah.
that couldn't have come cheap. How did Shackleton actually pay for all of this?
Well, no, it wouldn't have been cheap even by today's
No.
standards, I would have thought. But
No.
it was just a constant battle. But he was a brilliant, charismatic salesman, and he had to be. He
Mm.
spent months launching public appeals, chasing private donations from wealthy benefactors, and securing corporate sponsorships for everything from clothing to food. And
Okay.
the cold weather cold weather, I can't even say it. Cold weather clothing was made by Burberry.
Oh,
But
really?
yeah, it
Wow.
was, yeah. Yeah. So even the British government chipped in a limited amount, though they were a bit distracted by the war, funnily enough.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, obviously, they would have had to have packed for every single eventuality. Like when you go on holiday in England, you have to pack for all weathers because you can't
Yeah.
guarantee what's going to happen. So, there would have been food, fuel, sledges, I'm guessing. And I imagine they would have taken dogs,
No, what made you think that?
sledging dogs, surely.
Yeah, yeah, of course they did. Yeah,
I was going
they
to
took loads
say.
of them. Yeah, they took loads of them, and they had to pack enough supplies for a prolonged stay on the ice and a
Mm,
complete transcontinental crossing as well. So they also set up a full scientific program, which helped attract funding from academic bodies.
okay.
And they packed meticulously, obviously, as you do, selecting what they thought was necessary for a grand geographical triumph.
Mm.
But tragically, obviously, they had no idea that those very same sample like supplies would soon become a tight inventory of basic human survival.
Wow. So it's August 1914. The ship leaves Plymouth and they are officially away. So, what was that initial journey down to South America actually like? Was it all smooth sailing?
Well, to start with, they were waiting to see if they would be called up to the Royal Navy, and
Right.
they then got a telegram from Winston Churchill, who was the first Sea Lord, I believe, and saying, "Just go, off you go."
Oh, okay, fair enough.
So yeah, then for the most part, it was fairly standard sea voyage for that era, but it was absolutely vital for Shackleton. It gave him his first real chance to observe the crew, see how they gelled, and watch the ship's dynamics play out, things like that.
Yeah.
So the men settled into their daily grind of shipboard life, keeping watch, managing the sails, and starting their first scientific observations.
So, did they make any stops along the way, or was it just weeks of open ocean?
They made a brief stop at Madeira, which is
Okay.
like a Portuguese island in the
Yeah.
Atlantic, and that was mostly to take on fresh water and local produce. And if they didn't pick up Madeira cake, I'd be disappointed. It must have been quite bittersweet for them looking back, because that was literally their last taste of warm weather and settled, I'm going to say civilized, in inverted commas, land for a long time.
Can imagine. And after Madeira, is it straight across the Atlantic?
Yeah, proper blue water crossing, they say.
Right.
It took them over 2 months in total, facing everything from dead calms to rough Atlantic storms. And it was the perfect test for the endurance. And it allowed Captain Worsley to really see what his officers and crew were made of.
Right.
And they eventually rolled into Buenos Aires in Argentina in early October.
Oh, okay. And I guess that wasn't just a holiday stop, was it? They had quite serious
Yeah.
business to deal with while they were there.
Yeah, huge amounts of business. Yeah, so Buenos Aires was their major logistical hub. So they had to load up on massive amounts of food, equipment, fuel, specifically coal for the ship's engines.
Mm.
And Shackleton also had a mountain of paperwork and admin
Always
as well.
paperwork, even back then.
Isn't there always? Yeah. He had to clear that up before they could cut ties from the modern world. And interestingly, this is where the crew list got finalised.
Oh, okay. So is this where they discover the teenage stowaway, or had he already been found? I forgot about him.
No, this is so yeah. That's Percy Blackborough. He sneaked aboard back in England, but by the time they hit Argentina, he was officially discovered. So instead
Right.
of just throwing him out or throwing him in the brig or leaving him in England, I don't know, they actually relented and took him on as a ship steward.
Talk about a lucky break. Although, perhaps given what was coming, maybe an unlucky break.
Yeah, true. I think yeah, if you look back, he'd probably wish they'd kicked him out at Buenos Aires, but he obviously had no idea what he'd signed up for. But
No.
by November, the ship had been fully provisioned, the dogs were housed, and the crew was complete. Obviously, they waved goodbye to Buenos Aires and set sail for South Georgia, which is the edge, we say the edge of civilization.
Okay, so they're leaving the warm sunshine behind, and I take it the weather starts turning nasty as they head further south.
Yeah, definitely. So this leg of the journey took endurance into that wild, increasingly freezing waters you think of in the South Atlantic,
Yeah.
and it was a proper. I want to say baptism of fire. I'm not sure if that's right in freezing cold weather, but
No.
that is a baptism
Know
of
what you
fire for the
mean?
crew. Yeah,
Yeah.
it helped them acclimatise to these brutal conditions that are waiting for them. And Captain Worsley's navigation skills were really put to the test here as they hit much stronger winds and far rougher seas.
But I imagine it wasn't just grey skies and big waves. Did they start seeing any of the classic Antarctic wildlife?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they as they got closer to South Georgia, the crew started spotting like albatrosses and penguins, and
Oh,
even
wow.
seals and whales. And it was a spectacular glimpse of the world they were entering. But Shackleton and his officers weren't just sightseeing. They used this time to run drills, ensure all the ice travel and camping equipment was sorted, and access to it was easy.
Oh, okay. So then they hit South Georgia. What was South Georgia like back in 1914?
So they arrived in early November in a place called Grytviken, and
Right.
Grytviken was a Norwegian whaling station, and it was a hive of industrial activity, which must have been quite a bizarre sight. Even I suppose if
Yeah.
I went there, I'd probably find it bizarre. But it was literally was their last outpost of, is that word, civilization again,
Yeah.
before the vast wilderness of the Weddell Sea.
So this is that absolute final pit stop. So what did they need to get done while they were there?
It was all about that final resupply, and they
Mm.
topped up on essential food, took on fresh water, make sure that the ship was packed to the
Mm.
rafters, and it also gave the men a brief chance to rest and recuperate. Recuperate, is that word? Yeah,
I
yeah,
know what you mean.
sleep after weeks at sea. So crucially, they spoke to the Norwegian whalers to gather local knowledge about like the ice conditions ahead, and obviously they're whalers, and they warned them that the Weddell Sea was notoriously unpredictable that year.
Oh dear. So the locals who actually work these waters, they're telling them to be careful. I'm
Yeah,
guessing though Shackleton isn't the type to turn back before he's even started.
no, of course he's not. No, he
No.
listened, but his ambition was set.
Yeah.
So Grytviken was their final link to the outside world. So once they dropped their moorings and sailed south, there would be no safety nets, and they were utterly reliant on their own resources. So with their final preparations completed, they waved goodbye to civilization, the last of civilization, and
Mm.
headed the Endurance straight into the ice. Obviously, with no way of knowing what was going to come.
No, they wouldn't have gone if they'd known, would they? So they've left South Georgia and they've ignored the whalers' warnings and they're heading into the Weddell Sea. So how long did that initial optimism last?
Not very long,
No,
unfortunately. It
no.
it started off smoothly enough, and the crew they're full of their anticipation, probably quite
Mm.
excited by the whole thing. But as they pushed further south, they hit the first signs of Antarctic pack ice.
Oh,
So yeah, so at first it was like scattered ice floes, like individual pieces of sea ice floating about. Captain Worsley was able to skillfully steer the Endurance through the gaps and leads, they call them,
mm.
which are basically channels of open water.
Right. But I'm guessing the further south you go, the tighter those gaps will get, surely?
Exactly, yeah. Yeah. It quickly turned into a massive, ever tightening labyrinth, and the
Right.
leads become narrower, much harder to find. So progress slowed to a crawl. And
Wow.
sometimes they'd managed only a few miles in a single day. Like navigating this mess required constant vigilance.
Yeah, I bet. How do you even navigate a ship through a maze of ice like that? I mean, you can't just look at a map.
No, no, it itself is a craft, and it
Yeah.
relies on a mixture of skill and sheer trial and error. So
Wow.
Worsley or one of the officers would spend hours up in the crow's nest just scanning the horizon for open water or like a thinner ice. And they had to watch out for pressure ridges where the ice flows collide and buckle into massive ridges. And sometimes Worsley would even use the ship's strength to gently nudge smaller flows out of the way. But that's quite a high stakes game, because if
Yeah.
you misjudged it, you could split the hull open.
Wow. And I suppose on top of all of that, you're completely at the mercy of the weather as well.
Completely. They had to constantly monitor the winds and currents, because shifting the wind could either open up a path or slam the ice shut around them. And the most important quality they needed was patience.
Yeah.
There were times the ice was just too thick, and they simply had to sit there and wait for nature to move it, which I can. That must be so frustrating.
Yeah. I mean, did they have a deadline to
Yeah,
start
uh,
when they needed to start their march?
yes, that was the root of Shackleton's growing anxiety.
Mm.
So by the time January 1915 rolls round, the ice conditions were unusually heavy, far
Yeah.
worse than anyone had thought they would be.
Mm.
And they made several attempts to find a landing site near Vassal Bay, but every
Right.
single time they were blocked by these impenetrable walls of ice. The coastline
Oh.
was so close, but completely out of reach.
So the summer season is ticking away. They can't land, and
No.
they're basically just stuck in this frozen maze. I mean, what's going through Shackleton's mind at this point?
Well, he obviously he knew they were in serious trouble, and the
Mm.
delay meant the window for the transcontinental crossing was rapidly closing. And
Yeah.
if they couldn't land soon, they'd face the ultimate nightmare of a polar explorer, which was getting trapped in the ice or for the brutal Antarctic winter.
Oh.
I mean, summer must have been bad enough, but winter must have been appalling. And we again
Yeah.
get to, by the end of January, the dream of crossing the continent had to be sidelined. And the focus then shifted entirely to a much more immediate, terrifying problem, and that was just finding a safe space for the ship to winter. But the Weddell Sea wasn't going to let them go quite that easily.
Okay, so January 1915, they're stuck in a frozen maze. The ice
Yeah.
is tightening, if that's the right word for it. And I guess the leads of open water, they're just vanishing. So when did, or what was the exact moment that the trap completely shut, if you like?
So on that, yeah, okay, so that happened on the 19th of January, 1915, and the temperature plummeted, the
Mm.
wind shifted, and it packed the ice fields together, which were just absolute immense force, and
Mm.
the endurance became firmly and uh, irrevocably, whatever that word is. It was
I,
trapped.
I knew the word you meant. I'm not going to attempt to
Yeah,
pronounce it.
yeah, yeah. As soon as I made the mistake of thinking about the word and I ruined it, but it was trapped. They weren't. It wasn't coming out. So she could no longer like maneuver under her own power,
Right.
and they were completely frozen fast inside a massive ice floe.
That must have been absolutely terrifying. So, did they realise, or do you think they realised straight away that they were stuck for good?
Not initially. So at first, there was this bit of hope that it was just a temporary freeze up, and
Mm.
Shackleton thought a change in the weather or the currents might break the ice apart for them, just
Mm.
to let them push on to the Vassal Bay. And
Yeah.
he actually ordered the crew to conserve fuel and provisions, thinking it would be a relatively short delay. But
Yeah.
as the days turned into weeks, that the grim realization set in, and they weren't moving. Well, not under their own steam anyway.
What do you mean? What was the ice moving?
Yeah, yeah, they were drifting. So the entire massive ice field was floating in a generally northwesterly direction, which was taking them further and further away from their landing site.
Oh.
So they realising they're trapped for the entire Antarctic winter. Shackleton made the pragmatic choice to prepare the ship as their winter quarters. So they
Right.
battened down the hatches, as they say, and they even built small ice huts on the floe near the ship.
That sounds incredibly claustrophobic. So,
That's terrible.
I mean, there would have been months of total darkness at this
Yeah.
point, and they're stuck on a wooden ship in the middle of a frozen ocean. I mean, how did Shackleton stop them from all going mad, or did they go mad? Who
Um,
knows?
it was a masterclass in leadership.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so Shackleton knew that boredom and despair were just as dangerous as the cold, and he
Yeah.
established a strict daily routine. So the men had tasks like maintaining the ship, hunting for seals and penguins just to get fresh meat, which helped ward off scurvy. But he
Yeah.
also focused heavily on entertainment. So they had
Oh,
games, lectures, mock trials, sing-alongs,
wow.
which is where Leonard Hutty's banjo become absolutely invaluable, which are words I never thought I would say.
No, I mean, thank goodness for the banjo,
Yeah,
which are words I never thought I would say. But outside this little bubble of forced cheer,
yeah,
the environment must have been pretty brutal, I would have thought.
and yeah, it's got to be unforgiving. I would have thought.
Yeah,
So the Antarctic winter brought near constant darkness, plunging temperatures, and fierce like blizzards
yeah.
that would just shake the ship. And the whole time they were listening to this terrifying soundtrack. Shall we say the ship was constantly groaning, creaking, and you get that noise of splintering as well.
Is that because of the ice pressing against it?
Yeah. So it's a phenomenon the crew called the squeeze, and the ice flows around them were constantly shifting and colliding, and that exerts millions of tons of pressure on the ship's hull.
Right.
And the thick timbers would visibly flex and distort. It got so bad that the pressure caused leaks, and the crew had to work tirelessly at these pumps, huge pumps, just turning them by hand
Yeah.
in the freezing dark just to keep her afloat. But it also found the rudder was badly damaged as well.
I think Shackleton must have known that the ship couldn't take that forever.
Yeah, he must have seen the writing was on the wall, and
Yeah.
he kept up a brave face for the men, but he was quietly preparing for the absolute worst. And he
Yeah.
had supplies gathered and organised on deck so they could make a hasty retreat onto the ice if they had to.
Okay.
And as the winter turned to spring around September, October, the ice began to thaw and move even more violently. And at that,
Right.
the pressure reached a critical breaking point, and the ice had spent months tightening its grip, and it was finally ready to crush the ship, the Endurance.
Oh. So this is October 1915, and the spring thaw, I'm just making sure I've got this right. The spring
Cool.
thaw is actually making the ice move more violently.
Yeah.
So the squeeze, as they call it, that's reached a crisis point. What what did those final moments look like for the ship?
So it would have been a slow, agonising death for the Endurance.
That's awful.
You've got the ice surrounding them, starting, which starts cracking and colliding with huge force, and the
Mm.
hull began to buckle and twist, and the solid timber beams were snapping with sounds that were apparently like gunshots, and the deck itself was warping, and they could see it happening.
And you mentioned earlier that there were leaks, so I take it that they were just becoming too much to handle.
Yeah, they were fighting a losing battle. So
Wow.
even though that you've got all these men working the pumps non-stop, the water is just pouring in to the inside the ship. And on the 27th of October, 1915, Shackleton realised the inevitable. So he
Mm.
gave the order to abandon ship,
Oh,
which must have been heartbreaking for them, really, because it's not
yeah.
just your home; it's the last real link to civilization. This is also how you expected to get home.
Yeah. That's terrifying to think about. You're basically unloading your whole life onto a floating sheet of ice. I
Yeah.
imagine panic must have set in by that point.
No, it didn't. No,
Really?
and
Oh.
no, it didn't. That's down to Shackleton's his foresight, his preparations
Mm.
that he'd already put into place, and the crew acted with incredible discipline, and they calmly hauled their essential supplies onto the ice floe. So you've got food, sleeping bags, navigation gear, and which turned out to be very crucially the ship's three small lifeboats.
And this is when those famous photos were taken, right? When the ship was actually going down.
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're the ones. Yeah,
I've
so
seen
that's
those.
Frank Hurley, and he was
Yeah.
out there on the ice in amongst this freezing chaos with his big camera, and he captured those iconic, haunting images of the Endurance listed over,
Mm.
tangled in the ice, being slowly crushed. And after they salvaged what they could, They had to watch her linger for nearly a month, and finally,
Wow.
on the 21st of November, her stern rose up out of the water, and she slowly sank beneath the ice.
Can you even can you imagine? I can't even imagine, but can you imagine the silence that must have followed when the ship just disappeared under the ice and you've just got these 28 guys just standing on this frozen sheet in the middle of nowhere? Like, what do you even do?
That yeah, I can't even imagine the scale of that
No,
predicament. Must have been you couldn't even. Yeah, it was
no.
staggering.
Yeah.
They were hundreds of miles from any land, completely exposed to the elements, with their remaining supplies just piled up on the ice. And obviously, that dream of crossing the continent was gone, dead. And the only
Yeah.
objective now was just staying alive.
I mean, how do you think Shackleton handled that exact moment? I mean, that is the ultimate test of a leader.
Oh yeah, it definitely was. Yeah, he'd gathered the men, and he made it clear to them that their survival now depended entirely on staying unified and focused.
Right.
And he didn't let them dwell on the loss. Instead, he
No.
and his officers immediately started planning their next move. And
Good on
their
him.
options were, funny enough, their options were very limited, but they
Yeah.
knew they couldn't just sit there. So
No.
the initial plan they settled on was a really brutal one, and they were going to try and march across the moving ice, dragging
Oh.
those heavy lifeboats with them towards Paulet Island, where
Okay.
they knew there was a cache of emergency supplies.
Okay, so the ship's gone and they're stuck
Yeah,
on this floating sheet of ice.
yeah.
I mean, they must have felt so exposed and cold. And I mean, obviously that was the plan, was to march, but what did they actually do first? Like, what was the first thing they did?
Well, they had to establish a makeshift camp using whatever they'd managed to salvage from the ship. So they
Right.
pitched their tent on the ice floe and named it Ocean Camp.
Oh,
And
wow.
it offered next to no shelter from the biting polar winds, but it's all they had. Then Shackleton tried to put his march plan into action, and they began heading westward towards this Paulet Island,
Mm.
where an old emergency cache of supplies was waiting.
So they're basically pulling these heavy wooden lifeboats across broken ice and snow. That sounds absolutely punishing.
Yeah, just the thought of it makes my back ache. But
Yeah,
it was absolutely brutal. And
yeah.
it's not as if the ice. Everyone might think of the ice being flat. It wasn't. It was jagged. It was uneven and buried underneath, deep underneath snow as well. So the men were absolutely exhausted
I
hauling these
bet.
massive sledges, and they were
Yeah.
making painfully slow progress. So after a few days of back-breaking effort, they'd barely covered any distance at all. Now, Shackleton realised it was completely unsustainable and it was going to kill them, so he made a massive U-turn in his strategy.
So what was his backup?
It was just to stop marching and let the ocean do its work.
Oh,
And he decided they would rely entirely on the natural drift of the pack ice, and they would camp on the ice and wait for the currents to carry them further north towards warmer latitudes, where that ice would eventually melt and give them open water.
that sounds like a massive gamble. So you're literally sitting on an ice cube, waiting for it to melt so you can drop
Yeah,
your boats in,
yeah,
but hoping it carries you near land before the ice breaks up under your tent that you're sleeping in.
and yeah. I was going to say precarious. Probably doesn't quite sum it up, but they
No.
spent months living on that drifting ice. Everything was constantly damp, freezing, and they lived with the permanent fear that the floe would split right down the middle while they slept. And now their rations were running low, so they had to
Mm.
hunt any seals and penguins that came near the camp. And that fresh meat was the only thing keeping scurvy at bay.
So how on earth do you keep 28 men from completely losing hope during all of this?
That came down to Shackleton and Frank Wild, his second in command,
Mm.
and they were tireless in these efforts. They kept the men busy with their daily chores. They encouraged games and did everything they could just to maintain that camaraderie.
Mm,
But by April 1916, nature had forced their hand. So as they were drifting into those warmer waters,
yeah.
the ice flow it began to rapidly fracture and break up. So they had to scramble and move their camp several times in total darkness and obviously dangerous conditions because just you're moving from one area that's breaking up doesn't mean your new area is not going to break up.
So it's literally disintegrating under their feet.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Until finally you get to mid-April and the flow broke up completely and they had no choice. They had to launch their three tiny open lifeboats. So you had one called the James Caird, one called the Dudley Docker, and one called the Stancombe Wills into the
Right.
frozen into this freezing wild ocean.
Frozen.
They were all the ships. Yeah, they were all named after sponsors as well. The ships they were all named
Oh,
after
okay.
sponsors. Yeah, they were. So they're finally off the ice, but now they were floating in the open sea, and they're hundreds of miles from safety in boats completely unsuited for the Southern Ocean. And I should also mention this is without the dogs. They realised that if they kept the dogs, they'd have to share the food with their dogs. So the dogs became food.
Oh, I wish you hadn't told me that.
Musky burgers. Yeah,
Oh, that's awful. Right, let's end the
terrible.
podcast because I'm too
Yeah,
distraught. No.
and the
Um,
ship cat as well was shot.
what? You didn't even have to include that. You could have just kept that to yourself.
It wasn't all fun and games.
No. Anyway, right. Back to what we were talking about. So they've been forced off the ice and they're in these three tiny open lifeboats.
Yeah,
I mean, the Southern Ocean is famous for being some of the roughest water on the
yeah, it is.
planet. I
Yeah.
mean, how did these tiny boats even survive? Because they obviously survived because we wouldn't be talking about this.
Yeah,
Or,
it was a miracle basically that they didn't
yeah.
capsize immediately, and these boats were severely overcrowded. So they packed to the gunwales with 28 freezing men and what little gear they had left. Obviously, no dogs. They had virtually no
Or a
protection from
cat.
the elements. Yep,
Mm.
the temperatures were below freezing. The winds are howling, and you've got icy waves that are constantly washing over them as well. And the men were perpetually soaked to the skin, completely exhausted and frozen.
I can I can only imagine that trying to navigate in these conditions must have been an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, yeah. So that all came down onto the shoulders of Captain Worsley, and
Mm.
his navigation skills become the literal thread keeping them alive. And he was sitting in this tossing, soaking wet boat, trying to use a sextant and a chronometer to take readings whenever the sun actually briefly cracked through the heavy clouds. And he was aiming for a tiny, desolate speck of rock known as Elephant Island. Because
Wow.
if you look at it on the map, it apparently looks like an elephant. And now in
Oh,
his,
okay. I'm going to
yeah,
look that up
yeah,
after this.
yeah, if you Google it and have a look, you'll see why it got his name. He looks like a
Okay.
stuck, like straight out trunk and some ears. Anyway,
Okay.
his, yeah, I mean, if his calculations were off by even a fraction, they'd miss it completely, drift out into the Atlantic Ocean, where they'd all freeze or starve.
That pressure on him must have been absolutely immense, but obviously they made it, didn't they?
They did, yeah. So after several days of hell, battling the storms, navigating around rogue ice flows, they finally sighted the jagged cliffs of Elephant Island in mid-April 1916. Landing on those rocky, wave-battered shores was very dangerous, but they managed to haul the boat up and set up a camp, which they named Camp Wild. And now, from what I understand, is no one had ever landed on it, so they decided that the stowaway, as he was the youngest one on the ship, should be the first one on there. And I think his feet
Oh,
were frozen, so it wasn't a glamorous landing.
no, he probably just fell over as soon as he stood up.
Yeah.
So, for those men, just stepping onto solid ground after months of just being on shifting ice, that must have felt like heaven if they felt
Oh
anything because their
God,
feet
can
were
you imagine it?
frozen.
Yeah, it just, yeah, you're not worrying about it. disappearing out from under your feet. But
No,
it
it's,
was the first time that they'd stood on solid earth
yeah,
for
a long time.
nearly 500 days. Yeah,
Wow.
but that release was short-lived because once that adrenaline wore off, you then hit the grim reality of the situation. And Elephant Island was a completely uninhabited, windswept rock, and no one knew they were there. So no ships passed by, and they had zero way of calling for help, and their supplies were nearly gone.
Okay, so they're safe from sinking, but now they've got a new problem. They're effectively staring a death sentence in the face if they just sit there.
Yeah.
So what does Shackleton do at this point?
So he realised that waiting for rescue meant they would all eventually starve to death.
Yeah.
So he made what is widely considered one of the most audacious decisions in the history of exploration. He decided to take a tiny crew of 6 men and sail the James Caird, which was the strongest of the 3 lifeboats, and he would take it right back out into the teeth of the Southern Ocean. And he was going to attempt an 800-mile voyage all the way back to the whaling stations at South Georgia to bring back a rescue ship.
An 800-mile voyage in a tiny open lifeboat. Yeah,
Yeah.
that doesn't that yeah, that sounds dangerous. But I guess what choice did they have? So who did Shackleton actually take with him into that nightmare?
So he picked 5 men. Each
Right.
one was selected for a very specific reason. So crucially, he took Captain Worsley for his navigation skills,
Right. Yeah, that
and
makes
he took
sense.
Thomas Crean for his pure physical strength. And he also took 2 strong, able seamen, Timothy McCarthy and John Vincent. But the
Right.
wild card choice was the ship's carpenter, Harry McNish.
Is that so he had someone to fix the boat in case it started falling apart?
Exactly, yeah. So McNish's real work started before they even launched, and the James Caird was only 22 and a half feet long. Basically, it's like a little wooden eggshell, and McNish worked tirelessly to prepare it. He raised the sides of the boat to keep out the massive waves, and he used salvaged timber and canvas to like fashion a makeshift deck. And
Oh.
obviously, it wasn't pretty, but it didn't need to be. It just gave them at least a sliver of protection.
Okay, so April is this are they in April now?
Yep,
Um
24th of April. Yeah,
okay, so 1960 are we
yeah,
15 or 16? 15.
16 it is. Yeah,
Oh, is it
16.
already oh, of course it is, yeah, because we've had
Yeah, we're in
right.
16 now. Yeah,
So they pushed this tiny modified boat into the freezing surf and they
yeah.
waved goodbye to the rest of the crew. I mean, what was the actual voyage like then?
It was 16 days. They were out for 16 days of just absolute unrelenting hell, and they were dealing
Awful.
with like the Southern Ocean's infamous Cape Horn roll, as they're called, and that's mountainous waves and gale force winds that constantly threatened to flip them over. And the men were perpetually soaked to the skin in freezing temperatures. So frostbite sets in, their rations were pathetic, and they had to take turns bailing water out of the boat non-stop just to stay afloat.
And how did Wosley manage to find this tiny island in the middle of all this chaos?
Again, it was a miracle of navigation, and Worsley was being thrown around like a cork, and he had to stand up, pinned by the other men so he didn't fly overboard, and snap a sextant reading during the brief seconds the clouds parted, often right from the crest of a massive wave. And if he made a mistake, they'd drift right past the island into the open Atlantic and die.
Whoa.
But against all odds, on the 10th of May, they sighted South Georgia.
Wow. That must have been amazing. So, do they just roll onto the beach and go and order a hot breakfast? That's what I would do.
You'd like to think so, wouldn't you? But the drama wasn't over. So the fierce winds had forced them to land on the completely uninhabited western side of the
Oh,
island. The whaling stations and safety were on the eastern side, and between them lay an interior of, it wasn't just jagged mountains and massive glaciers, it was all unmapped. So the boat
Right.
was too damaged to sail around the island, and the men were too weak to row it.
You're joking. So after surviving all this ice and the ocean, they've now got to climb a mountain range.
Yeah, yeah. So
Oh, I'd
Shackleton,
just be like,
Green,
I'm
and
done.
oh yeah, yeah, just leave me here. I've had enough.
Yeah.
Um, so you've got Shackleton, Crean, and Worsley left the three weakest men by the boat and set off on foot. And they had
Right.
no, bear in mind, they've got no proper climbing gear. There's no sleeping bags, no maps. So in a final desperate display of willpower, they undertook this grueling, non-stop 36-hour trek across
Whoa.
treacherous glaciers, steep peaks as well. And they finally stumbled into Stromness whaling station on the other side.
Can you just imagine the look on the faces of the people at the whaling station? Like these three, they must have looked like ghosts just walking out of the mountains.
I do wonder, bear in mind, this is a whaling station. It's going to stink. But when these three blokes roll up, they must be horrendous. But
Yeah,
yeah, they looked completely unrecognisable.
I
And it was
bet.
the first time It was the first time the outside world had heard a single word from the Endurance expedition in nearly 2 years. And everyone assumed they were dead. Everyone assumed they'd died.
Well, of course you
Shackleton's,
would.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Shackleton's voyage in the James Caird and that trek across South Georgia are still looked at today as one of the greatest feats of human survival and leadership ever
Yeah.
recorded. But of course, Shackleton's first words weren't about celebrating. He
No.
immediately needed to figure out how to get back to Elephant Island for the rest of his men.
Okay, so Shackleton, Worsley, and
Worsley, yeah,
Crean,
yeah,
Worsley, they've made it to the whaling station, so that's
yeah,
safe. But
yeah,
obviously, there's still 22 men that have been left behind on Elephant Island. Plus, you got the three waiting by the boat as well.
yeah.
So yeah, there's them as well. And so I assume Shackleton didn't waste any time getting a rescue ship together.
No, not a single second. But this is the part of the story that often gets overlooked. So the rescue wasn't quick, and obviously it wasn't easy.
No.
That same persistent pack ice that had crushed the Endurance was still choking the waters around Elephant Island, and
Mm.
Shackleton actually failed 3 times to get back to them.
3 times. That must have been
Oh,
absolutely torturous. Knowing
yeah,
that his men are all stuck on this rock and he's stuck at sea.
yeah. Oh, he was growing increasingly desperate. So
Mm.
first he secured a British whaler called the Southern Sky, but impenetrable ice forced them to turn back just 70 miles from the island. And when he tried with a large British ship, the Discovery, and then an Argentine trawler as well, and every single time the ice slammed like the door in his face.
That must have been so frustrating. So obviously this is going on, but what is life like for the men that are waiting at Cape Wild, or was it Cape Wild or Camp Wild?
Um,
Um,
yeah, well, yeah. Either way, it was
Either way,
wild.
something
Yeah, so
wild on
so
the
they had
rock.
no idea. Yeah, they didn't have any idea if the James Caird had sunk or made it. So to survive, they had turned their remaining two lifeboats upside down on walls they'd made of rocks to make a small makeshift hut. And they were living in total squalor. And
Yeah.
it's freezing. They're surviving entirely on monotonous diets of seals and penguins.
Oh,
And it was Frank Wild, who's Shackleton's second in command, who held them together. And every single morning, he would roll up his sleeping bag and tell them, "Get ready, the boss might come today." And he kept that
wow.
flame of hope alive for 4 months, over 4 months.
Wow. That in itself is incredible leadership. So, how did Shackleton finally break through the ice?
He went to Chile. So
Oh, okay.
with so with the help of the British consul in Punta Arenas, he
Mm.
managed to secure a small, sturdy Chilean steam tug, which was called the Yelcho, and it was commanded by a fellow called Captain Luis Pardo. And they steamed south, and on the 30th of August 1916, the Yelcho finally broke through the mist and approached the island where the camp set up.
Oh, can you imagine the scene on the beach when they saw that tugboat appearing?
Oh, just the relief, the disbelief. followed by that overwhelming joy. And Shackleton stood on the deck of the tug and right at the front, and he started counting the figures running down to the shore. And as they got closer, he shouted out to Frank Wild, "Are they all well?" And Wild shouted back, "All well, boss. We're all well."
So they all survived. Every single one of them
Everyone,
survived.
everyone that went on that
So
survived.
that ship got crushed. They spent
Yeah,
months on the drifting ice, and then they were stranded on this island, and they all survived.
every single one. 28 men, all survived. And within
Wow.
an hour, all 22 from the island were safely aboard the Elcho. And when they finally made it back to Chile, the initial news was met with just astonishment, and
Yeah.
everyone had given them up for dead.
Yeah, I
So
bet.
this reappearance was a massive shock.
I I I mean, I can only imagine the scenes when they got back to Britain. They must have been treated like rock stars. I mean, were there grand parades and cheering crowd? Did they meet the king?
You'd have thought that would have all happened, but it didn't.
Yeah.
It
Really?
was a bit of a damp squib.
Oh,
You
really?
bearing in mind, yeah,
Oh,
bearing in mind the timing as well. So
oh,
by
of
the time they
course.
finally
Yeah.
set foot back in Britain in like the latter part of 1916, the First World War had been raging for over 2 years.
I guess everyone's
So,
priorities are
yeah, the nation's
elsewhere.
attention and bear in mind the resources as well were completely consumed by the battlefields in Europe.
I guess, yeah, people are dealing with rationing and casualties. So I suppose a
Yeah,
polar expedition, even one this miraculous, it probably felt a little bit distant, maybe.
exactly. Yeah, so that like the celebratory atmosphere was heavily tempered by the war. So
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, there was widespread relief, and the newspapers carried the incredible story hailing Shackleton as a hero and his men as symbols of British grit. But there were no parades or massive public celebrations, and their welcome was remarkably low key compared to your earlier polar homecomings. And I suppose their survival was probably used as propaganda to say this is how great the British men are.
Yes, I imagine. But that still does feel a little bit tragic, given what they had just been through to stay
Yeah.
alive. I mean, did they get any recognition?
Oh, yeah. Individually, they did. They weren't ignored. So
Oh, good.
Shackleton was widely lauded for his leadership. Many of the crew received medals and like commendations for their service. But instead of long period of rest and celebration, many of the men went straight from the frying pan into the fire. They joined up, went off to fight.
Oh, I wonder how many of them came back. I mean, it's incredible how a story that started with so much fanfare in 1914 ended up being almost completely overshadowed by history when they finally returned.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. So in the short term, the war dominated everything. But as the
Yeah.
decades rolled on, the story of the endurance gradually grew in stature. It shifted from being like a failed geographical expedition to a timeless, almost legendary masterclass in human endurance, and leadership as well, under immense pressure.
So, what about Shackleton himself after surviving something that harrowing and then I guess heading straight back into the war effort? Did he finally call it a day once peace arrived, and did he settle down for a quiet life?
Well, it'd be a bit boring. I said, yeah, he retired. And no,
Yeah.
you'd have thought he might have wanted to do all that, but the man still had that unquenchable thirst for exploration, and he couldn't
Right.
just settle. So
No.
after his wartime service, which included a stint in northern Russia, which was just helping to organise supplies for the British forces, the pull of of the South again became just too strong for him to ignore.
Mm.
So, 1921, he had organised his fourth Antarctic expedition, known as the Shackleton Rowett expedition, sailing on a ship called the Quest. And the goal this time was to map and explore the Enderby Land region.
Oh, okay. It's amazing that he actually had the energy to go back, but how did this trip end?
It is where he gets the energy from. Just reading it tires me, but it's one of those deeply poetic but incredibly sad moments in history. So in January 22, the Quest anchored off of Grytviken in South Georgia, the exact same whaling station where the Endurance had made its very last stop before heading in to the ice all those years before. And right there on the 5th of January, Shackleton suffered a sudden heart attack and he died. He was only 47.
Wow. That's no age. Even then,
No,
that's
it's
no
nothing.
age. It's mad that he survived all those years of extreme peril and then just to pass away just as he reached that gateway to the
Yeah.
Antarctic again. Did they bring his body back to Britain?
So his widow, Emily Shackleton, actually requested that he be buried right there in South Georgia. So he was laid to rest in the Whaler Cemetery at Grytviken.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it really is like the ultimate fitting resting place for him. Forever
Yeah,
looking out over the Southern Ocean and landscapes that define his entire life. People still travel there today to see his grave.
I bet. I mean, it feels right that he stayed there, and his reputation skyrocketed after he passed away, didn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. So over the decades, his legend just grew and grew. So today,
Yeah,
people don't look at him as the man who failed across Antarctica. They look at him as the gold standard of leadership in a crisis.
yeah.
And it was his unique ability to keep his crew motivated, to maintain that morale when all hope seemed lost, and to put the survival of his men above everything else that made him a legend.
He really was remarkable, wasn't he? And it's
Yeah, oh
amazing to
yeah,
think that for over a century, his story is all we've got left because the ship itself, that's gone, that's been swallowed up by the ocean. And I suppose everyone assumed that it would just stay lost forever.
for a long time, yes. For
Mm.
well over 100 years, the wreck of
Yeah.
the Endurance lay lost beneath the waters in the Weddell Sea, and its
Mm.
final resting place was a complete mystery. But in February 2022, there was a privately funded expedition which was called Endurance 22, and it
Right.
set out to change that and it used some of the most advanced underwater searching technology in the world.
So they were looking for a wooden ship 3
Yeah,
kilometres down under a
yeah,
frozen sea. That sounds like trying to search for a needle in a haystack but the haystack's made of ice. Did they
yeah.
actually find anything though?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, it was in the news. I remember this in the news. And it was on the 5th of March 22. They made a historic announcement that they'd found the wreck of the Endurance. And she was sitting at a depth of just over 3,000 meters. But what's really incredible is that it was sitting just 4 miles south of the exact position that Captain Worsley had calculated with his sextant when she sank in 1915, and which is a
Wow.
massive testament to his navigational genius.
I feel quite ashamed that I didn't actually see anything in the news about the ship being located, but that is unbelievable. But after a century underwater, I mean, I imagine there wouldn't have been much left of a wooden ship.
Well, that's what you would think, but the footage, they brought back footage, and it was amazing. The wreck
Really?
is in a really, really well preserved condition, because the deep Weddell Sea is so cold, dark, and completely depleted of oxygen. You've got the usual marine organisms that would eat away at that wood. They don't survive down there, so the
Oh,
decay
okay.
has basically been frozen in time.
So what does it actually look like? Because I've not
It's
seen the video.
If you Google it, go and have a look. There's photos and
I
there's
will,
video,
yeah.
and it's brilliant. The ship's structure is largely intact. You can
Right.
clearly see the helm. The masts are still there. You've still got the gold lettering on the stern spelling out Endurance, and it
Oh,
looks. If
really?
you look, yeah, if you look at you Google Endurance, you'll
I
see
will.
photos taken at the time before it set sail, and then you'll see it now, and it looks as if it had just been painted. And you could even see some of the crew's personal belongings scattered on the deck. It's
That's amazing.
absolutely amazing, just that tangible link back to
Like a
1915.
time capsule almost.
Brilliant, yeah.
So it must have sparked a massive wave of global interest all over again. I mean, are they planning to raise it or bring anything up to the surface?
Oh no, no, I never do. But there are no plans, and that's their intention. So the wreck
Right,
site has been designated as a protected historic site. So the
right,
whole ethos now is to document and study the ship using strictly non-evasive techniques,
right.
so that it leaves it completely undisturbed for future generations, and it's a permanent memorial to what happened there.
Wow. I suppose as well, if they did bring it up to the surface, it would potentially disintegrate because it's,
Yeah, I
you know,
suppose.
it's
Yeah,
being preserved, isn't it?
everything
So
that's preserved and it would be taken away. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, it feels like the final chapter to the story, this ship that became a symbol of human survival, if you like, is finally found. Um, yeah, that's
Yeah.
quite.
It adds that final physical layer to an already legendary tale.
Mm,
And then the Endurance didn't just survive the history book; she's still down there, which
yeah,
that little quiet reminder of what Shackleton and his men pushed through over a century ago. And this is why we are announcing that you and I are going to the South Pole in a wooden rowing boat with a bit of tarpaulin over the top,
excellent. I look forward to
with
that.
only dogs to eat.
No, no, no. Well, aside from that, that was epic. And thank you for bringing this incredible story to life.
Oh, thank you. It's an event that's fascinated me for a long time, and
Yeah.
it has been a pleasure sharing it.